everybody, welcome back to The Followers. So today is episode number 52. I've been correctly advised before we came on air. But yeah, episode 52, and today we have Connacht S&C coach Barry O'Brien on. So yeah, we haven't had a rugby person on in a while, so it was great to get an insight on how they do things in Connacht. How did you find it, John? What was your favourite part?
I think the whole point of setting up with Barry was just for me to have a catch up with a lad I went to college with. I didn't really care about the rugby stuff. Really interesting though, like when we were teaming up, Barry said, I am very much the C in the S&C coach. So it was, we'd probably call this putting the C back in strength and conditioning. So what does that actually look like? Is it just going out and run? Is it doing bike sessions? Or do we need to be more, like thinking more long term in terms of integrating the overall sport?
Yeah, 100%. I think very much when people think strength and conditioning, the strength is in all caps and then conditioning is just as an aside. So it's good to see someone just purely focused on that, which is such an important part of the sport, and not just rugby, any sport really. So it's good to see someone looking at it and trying to talk a little bit at the gym. Is not really how we approach different things, is it?
Yeah, no, it was brilliant. Like, touched on numerous things, like, work for players who are injured, off-beat work, tying in with your technical and tactical coaches, touched on some GPS and had a brief discussion around concussion, and even some advice for young S&C coaches towards the end as well. So loads for people to get from it.
Yeah, definitely loads to dive into there. So we'll kick it off without any further ado. Hope you enjoyed this week's episode.
Barry, we've met a couple of times in the past through various points of education, whether it be college, the S&C sort we did there in Southside Fitness in Dublin, I think it was where it was based. Do you want to give us, instead of me trying to attempt it in bitty parts, do you want to give us a bit of an overview of yourself, how you came to be at Connacht Rugby and a bit of a journey you took there, and a little bit of a, not a full about term, but a little bit of a diversion to the left there at one stage.
Myself and John met back in 09, was it?
09, yeah.
Yeah, 09 we started, and we did PE together in college. I did maths with that as well. So I was down there for 4 years, came home the summer of the fourth year and decided not to teach, go making stints in a factory for 3 odd years. So did that. Probably was about a year and a half into that when I realised the monotony wasn't for me. So I started to look into a bit of further education, and I kind of always had a grow for the sports side of things, and probably the preliminary reason I got into PE in the first place. So I started looking into masters, and I came across the one in UL, so the sports performance. So I applied that year, got rejected first time around. Brilliant, go back to the drawing board. So looked at the CV, and I was probably naive in going for the first place. I'd fuck all education in that regard. So I bulked out the degree, went off and did the CSCS, got experience with a couple of teams, and then reapplied next year, and luckily got picked up that time. So then as part of that, then there was, I think, 50 hours of placement we had to do towards the back end. So another mate of ours, Gary McGrath, you'd probably know him, John. Yeah, so he's with Canadian Athletics now currently.
Oh, I was wondering where he was, all right.
Yeah, so he was in Connacht at that stage interning. So I kind of used him to get to the Boston side and got the direct email, and kind of plagued him for a little bit, and eventually met for a coffee, had a talk, and went in and ended up doing a season with him interning. And luckily after that season I got picked up for that year. So I landed there probably interning the year just after they won the Pro 12. So whether it's causation or correlation now, we haven't won anything since, but I've been there since anyways.
And you didn't play rugby growing up, like hurling was, and basketball, you were kind of background growing up, weren't they?
Yeah, so look, I played everything growing up as every young lad does. Probably predominant ones were, I'd say, hurling, basketball, a bit of golf, and then obviously the bit of soccer there. Rugby wise, I think I played about 3 weeks after the 2003 World Cup. I think I gave it a go for that long. Had these aspirations of being an out half at that stage, and realised they'd no boot in me, so it was pretty sharp to pack it in. And then I guess a bit of tag would be probably the height of it then after that. But it was a new land for me, getting into that environment, and probably very different athletes to, I guess, the path they took growing up to the path I would have taken playing hurling along the way, or basketball, and I guess the structure of the training they would have done in comparison.
Did you put a lot of effort at the start then into learning a bit more about rugby, or like was there kind of not so much templates, but general principles in Connacht that you were just trying to base your work off before you said, okay, I need to start learning a little bit more about this myself so I can just reorganise these principles in my head a little bit more? Or how do you approach that?
Like, I'm still learning the game, John. I'm a guy head through and through, so...
The whistle goes in the middle of a ruck and you're like, I have no idea what happened there.
What's going on here, lads? So no, like, it's continual learning experience for me, and that can be, down to, I guess, rules starting off is first and foremost, demand starting off, and then you get into the bit more, the subtleties of a tackle technique, or the perfect jackal and what that looks like. So it's always always a learning experience for me. I guess when I arrived there initially, my thought process, or for me, it was whatever job I had, do it to the best. Not maybe to get distracted with other strands that weren't in control, or I had aspirations to go down the line. Whatever I had on my plate, I made sure that was squared off first and foremost. And then that opened up, I guess, other avenues. And when you show proficiency in that, you start getting responsibilities elsewhere, which is I think when you land in an environment like that, you can get carried away with yourself and kind of, oh, that looks nice over there, I'll pop over here and give your work half done here. So it's
And you came from the Sports Performance Masters in UL. I think you're actually the fourth person we've had on now. You're in the same class as Stephen Casey. We had him on just before Christmas there. What were some of the big things you took from that? Because obviously on the PE end, it's not wasn't then anyway, a hugely science or performance-based course. It was very much around group management, working with people and delivering stuff that way. It was probably quite different then when you went, like, people would often link the two together saying, oh, PE, sports performance, so they must be related. I'd say you noticed quite a few differences in between the two.
Yeah, like, and I guess that was primarily why I did that course in the first place. I love sports, and it was probably stupid in a way looking back, and I probably got to the end of first year and I wanted to go over to sports science then, but you would have probably disowned me at that stage if I took that route there. or like just chatting to the old lad, and he was like, finish off the degree, it's a good degree to get, and I guess the maths as well with it, it always kind of stood to me. But definitely I remember even my application towards it, we had in our undergrad an anatomy module there.
Anatomy and physiology, yeah.
And I'm pretty sure I bloody tanked that now. I think it coincided probably with second year for me as well, which was probably one of my more social years. But to put it politely, so yeah, when I got into the masters, I guess I had a lot more desire to learn as well. And like right now, I guess physiology would be probably one of the things I really enjoy going after or looking at. And maybe some of the other things that I liked in the first place when I got into gym going or gym lifting or whatever you want to say as a young lad, doing 10 by 10s to beat the bandwagon. It's breaking it down, I guess, to that physiological component, and what are you looking for? And that's where I guess I'm becoming a bit more educated on. Still so far off, it's always learning, but yeah, I guess a slight change of thought process.
And just when we were planning for this, I was kind of sending you on a few bits to chat around and stuff, and I'm even thinking it might be the title of today, but you're very much the C in the S&C when it comes to Connacht. Will you just give us a brief explanation of what does that actually mean? So many people think of S&Cs, your main role is in the gym, you're getting people strong, you're getting more powerful, more explosive, and often the C is kind of an aside to all of that. But that being one of your primary roles, what kind of, first of all, what is that, and then what does that look like in terms of your day-to-day?
Yeah, so I guess my journey and my responsibilities of it's probably always evolving inside in there. So when I started off, first and foremost, you're interning, you're doing a bit of the bitch work, which is, you got to do it, fair enough. You do that good enough, you get handed other things. So took over like GPS then for a while, the kind of sports science side of life, whether that be, data interpretation, collecting, analysing, etc. And I guess even towards the back end of that first year intern, I was starting to get some little handouts, I guess you call them, with the off-field conditioning. So we Tristan Sharp there was at the time. So we'd have a few recon guys, and he'd go, look, Barry, grab these two guys for some off-field conditioning. And early doors, it's a bit of trial and error, but you start to get, okay, I've applied this stimulus, I've gotten this response, I've checked in with him the next day, right, I might have gone too hard there, or I could have gone harder, or what was my actual intended purpose of that session, rather than burying a guy, which, I think conditioning wise, the easiest thing to do is to make someone tired. It's probably the easiest thing we could do in our role. So probably worked my way then through the off feet. Did that for, guts of a year, and then started transitioning to the on field stuff. So if we had a week's break in the middle of a season, I'd start divvying out the runs for the boys to do while they were away, and then that progresses into the off season and planning, and then you're starting to shape how the pre-season goes from a conditioning standpoint, and you're starting to liaise then with certain other members of the organisation, and how conditioning is going to fit in, and how the coaches is going to either supplement or tie in with you in that regard. And then I guess in the last about 6 months I've probably stepped into the recon side of things, so handling a lot more the S side of it then as well, like so the strength side of that. We've had a young graduate come on with us, Tom Brady, so he's been fantastic. He's taken the GPS side of things and he's run with that, and he's doing great things with it, and definitely taking a positive direction. And it was probably from my end, it was getting a bit stale looking at a computer screen after 3 or 4 years of doing it. So yeah, just it was good to get that shake up. And I think where I'm at currently now, I'm really looking forward to delving in, because there's so many directions I can go rather than being, I don't want to say pigeonholed, but the view is going out the way rather than in the way. I can zoom out that bit more.
We'll touch on the GPS in a second, but you mentioned there off-feet conditioning. Can you just give us an idea of what that is and why it might be important for the group, some players, whatever?
Yeah, so I guess look in a recon setting or an RTP, I don't know, or rehab.
Rehab, return to play, yeah.
Rehab we'll go with. You've got a guy, it could be either upper or lower body that can't run, or say he's a banged up shoulder, can't run. Personally, I love upper body injuries when doing off-field conditioning. It's so much easier. It's just that bit easier, or vice versa, I should say. Sorry, no. Hate upper body injuries because then they're stuck on a bike for all that time, and they don't like you by the end of it, put it that way. But you can get inventive and creative, and I guess that's a side of it as well that was great learning for me. I always think of a session from a player's perspective, and I don't want to. The easiest thing would be go right 30 on, 30 off on a bike, 8, rest 2 minutes, do it 3 times, Monday to Friday. There you go. We'll progress it by X amount of watts each day. Like that would drive me berserk. So for me, variation is a huge thing for players, and even that's filtered probably outside of the off-feet conditioning side of things. But the off-feet, yeah, it can be used, I guess, as a supplementary stimulus as well for in-season guys. It's pretty low cost because mostly concentric in nature. There's no repetitive impacts on the ground, especially if you've got like a 120 kg prop. That you just don't want to run fucking laps with. The off feed is a viable option there, and even I guess in pre-season we can use it in our I don't know what the PC term for this club is now, but the fat club or whatever
I think most of the I don't know weight management group, to be nice, but yeah,
whatever that PC side of things is these days. Yeah, it can be used there, and even just as quick little hit outs or high bursts. We probably utilised it quite well last pre-season as a kind of anaerobic stimulus for 2 weeks only, because you look at some of the stuff from the likes of Jan Ulbricht. He's that Dutch swim coach, but he talk about how easy it is to develop the anaerobic system, but also like how easy it is to go over the edge as well with it. So we literally, before our pre-season games within the Aviva, we had 2 Friday sessions that were 15 minutes long, and the boys were rattled through them. Very kind of high intensity, high out push. Looking in on it, it looked like Metcon, but there was a slight bit more thought into it, I guess, and the layout of it. But for us, that was a really easy, high expenditure but low risk setting to put the guys in. And whether it be from that mental standpoint or the actual energy development side of things, it stood pretty well to them. Anyways, the feedback was good now.
Is that the end of pre-season you're doing that, or is it kind of when you have a break at some stage in the middle?
That was actually, we'd done probably 4 to 5 weeks on pitch at that stage, and like last year was kind of a funny one with everything that happened, and we were still training while everything was locked down from distance. So the chat was that we could have as little as 3 or 4 weeks for things to kick off again. And obviously hindsight is great now, knowing that that was never going to be a possibility. But you know, we had to keep guys prepped for what we didn't know then, but we had to keep them prepped. So obviously we came back and we were structured for 4 to 5 weeks training, and that was in pods to begin with. So you had like 7 players, and then 7 became 14 players, and then 14 joined up another 14. So it was kind of like setting up a bubble, or the infancy stages of the bubble for COVID. So then we had like maybe 2 to 3 weeks then of complete team training, leading into, I don't know if you remember the Aviva last summer. The provinces would have played each other over 2 weekends back end of August. So about two weeks out from that, maybe a week out from that, we did them 2 sessions on the Friday. And literally it was like we trained, give the boys an hour off, and then they were allocated a 15-minute slot, rocked into the gym. And yeah.
That's kind of based on having a decent aerobic base beforehand that wouldn't replace
Exactly,
that.
yeah.
And you're only going to get so much out of that for those 2 weeks. If you extend that to 3 to 4, you're probably carrying or risking way more fatigue than the physiological benefits. I'm guessing.
100%. And I guess because we had no idea what was going to happen after them 2 games either, we were nearly able to taper for them 2 games. It was almost like a Pekin style approach we took. So it was great to be able to execute that, I guess, with a team. But obviously this year coming, and we have our new competition in place, that we probably have to take a slightly different tact and look at the season as a whole, that we're not going to come out of the traps for the first 3 games and then fall off a cliff for the rest of it. So it's going to be good getting back into, I guess, the somewhat normal pre-season.
Just briefly there, to bring it back to some of the start of the off-feet work, and you say you're bringing in some variation for the players' mentality as much as nothing else. How difficult is it sometimes to balance variation with still making sure you're meeting the intended physiological outcomes? How kind of carefully you have to tread that line?
It depends how actual deep you want to drill down into this now. And if we're talking about, you know, setting, let's say 55 meters over 10 seconds to get an intended output, if you're saying something as simple as 3, 2, 1, go. So if that person is going on 1 and you're not picking them up on that, sure, isn't that, you know, 11 seconds to do 55 seconds? So it depends how far you want to drill down to it. So what I would say is if you had a pass in midway through that run, is that going to be an issue? No. Or even tempo runs, if we do them, we'll often do them with start the rep with a kick receipt, so the boys will actually have a bit of skill, so they'll feel the high ball and then they'll get into their tempo run. Because if you do a standard tempo run session of like 2,000 meters of literally 100, 200 repeats, like if you've done them, they're boring as fuck. And you can only do them so long before A, you get kickback, and like B, it loses its benefit or its intended purpose. So yeah, anytime I can introduce a ball or a bag, I will. And like, I'm not a tackle coach or a defence coach or anything like so, but I can hold a bag. And by now I've started to learn some of the big blocks of, you know, a good tackle. So whether it be, you know, your body in front and leg drive, and I can start encouraging a given player with them little cues now. The little subtleties, yeah, I mightn't have, but, you know, bring in a ball, bring in a bag, bring in something for the player just to break up the monotony of it all. That would be my kind of outlook of it.
I suppose just with that there, say we're off the back of a very unusual 12 months, obviously, for fitness and keeping players, you know, going. So you've had your experiences, you know, with a very controlled group, you know, a very dedicated, devoted group to their job, professional athletes. But I suppose if we keep in mind the listeners that we have here would be coaches who are over, you know, your amateur teams around the country. Is there any kind of, I suppose you've kind of mentioned there a few maybe issues with, you know, tempos or, you know, that they get boring, and coaches definitely at a club level will look at that and go, that's a very long time for us to be giving up for, you know, for fitness. Is there any kind of like go-to bits of advice you would have for any coaches or S&C coaches there dealing with club teams on that, or like how to actually build up their fitness space appropriately with people who may or may not have actually ran over the last couple of months? Like normally, I know you say you could be going to proper pre-season, but like if I take even my own club that I'm working with and a good few clubs around them, a lot of guys actually haven't ran since they did like a random mini pre-season there around December at the end of the one of the lockdowns. So, do you treat it kind of just like a pre-season where, you normally go into it, or do you kind of think that people should maybe start at a lower level and work up? Or, just what are your kind of views there for keeping in mind just the amateur club?
Yeah, look, I guess looking in from the outside, first off, you have to have a good relationship with the coach. And for two reasons here, you've got to dial down their expectations a little bit from what they can do, because obviously you've got some, I don't know what team you're working, but if it's an old school guy coach, he's been wound up for a year waiting to run these guys, or train these guys, that he can lose the run of himself a little bit. So first of all, you got to be able to trust that if he says it's going to be a moderate or light session, that it is, and that if the result of the weekend isn't as planned, that it doesn't dictate necessarily, that the boys have to run hard, because, from my experience anyways, playing the game and being part of setups, there can be that emotional kind of switch with them guys. From our own end as well, then, you've got to recognise that most of the running, if they did do it, was probably on a road and probably 5k loops, because God knows we fucking love them. So the elements of like change of direction, and even moving faster than whatever, I don't know, 4 meters per second, like it's completely different. I guess the coach looking in on it, or the manager, sees locomotion and that the boys have been doing that, but it's completely different, and it's completely different stimulus to what they're used to. Now, I'd say the only saving grace for club guys is they're probably not as well, some of them, I know there's a lot of like very quality amateurs that have put some of our pros to shame, but they're not as specified, or they're not as fine-tuned as some of our guys. So like, I know if we got some of our guys to run a 5k, they would break probably, and that's to be expected. They haven't trained like that, and they haven't been intended to train like that. So I guess the fact that you've got an athlete that has a bit more variation to their background, that might actually be playing a bit of squash on a Tuesday or something, and then comes out and plays a bit of gardening on a Thursday, it's not necessarily a bad thing. They're probably that bit more adaptable to what you can throw at them. But yeah, obviously, undercut yourself if you're guessing yourself at all. If you ask the question, is this too much? It might be just to start off. And yeah, I'd say probably the overlooked thing is to actually liaise with the manager, like, and have a good relationship there, that you can either bounce ideas off him, or if he does want to go hard on a given day, you go, right, I'm going to dial back my input then on the 2 days before that.
Yeah, I think one thing that rugby coaches, I suppose, at the amateur level, not don't understand, but they kind of underestimate it with themselves, is like the level of intensity the kind of small-sided games or kind of playing drills have in rugby compared to like any other sport. There's so much more output, there's so much more stress. So as a conditioning coach, you're nearly trying to promote the kind of lower intensity stuff with your tempo runs, and from a coach's point of view, it's like, oh, Shane's not running them nearly enough, or they don't seem to be working that hard. When that's the side, if they don't build up that aerobic base, they're going to die in even those drills, let alone a game.
Yeah, and again, for me, it's when you go small sided games, the injury risk is huge. And like a lot of our issues is the reaction side of it as well. It's not just like a change of direction. So we obviously will have guys this off season have 10 runs to complete before they come in. The expectation has been set out to them guys that this is necessary work. If you come back and you don't do them, there's a high risk of you getting injured, because we want to roll straight into training with the ball in hand. Like years gone by, or we've probably only built to this over the last 2 or 3 years, that guys are in shape to actually train when they come back, not to condition, which is a subtle, but it's a big difference. Because if you have to get 2.5-3 weeks of just like we'd use hit running there, probably the 30-15 prescription side of things, traditionally. And so if we use that for three weeks, we're missing out on 3 weeks of ball in hand time, or actual junior and rugby, which is it's a waste of time. And on a pre-season as short as it is, we're not a Southern Hemisphere team. We need to utilise everything that we can.
Does contact and exposing players to contact play a role in condition? Like, do you have to be conditioned for that through specific means or more general means, or that combination of both?
Yeah, so look, conditioning, I think we think about it probably as that cardiovascular side of things. But as you said, like you're conditioning athletes to tolerate speed exposures, certain movement patterns, execution of skills under fatigue, and obviously the contact piece is there as well. So we would work with the rugby coaches, I guess, to shape drills in such a way that, you know, you're going from whether it be the speed into the collision or the distance, or if there's padding used, or, you know, tackle pads, or boys are wearing suits or shields. And I guess it's just taking a layer away each week or something, or adding an increased distance or an increased speed into the object, because you obviously have to build that tolerance. And that was probably one of the big ones from COVID. We broke after our South Africa trip that time, which was, I want to say, start of April, and we weren't back in then until like June, July. So guys had no contact exposures then. A couple of guys had a sausage bag out the back that they were making very good friends with at times, but you know, so that is definitely a side of things. And I know one of the questions you sent through about and you're probably going to branch into this as every good host will, about the concussion side of things here. He's teeing it up. So yeah, the contact side of things is definitely a necessity and a requirement to build it up gradually and methodically, I guess.
And like, yeah, just from what you're saying there, ensuring that the players are conditioned or match ready, do you have like a few key markers? Are you playing games and train? Because obviously you don't always go out and play the full match and be like, okay, yeah, fair enough, because you're never 100% certain that it's actually mimicking real match intensities. And sometimes you do your 6 or whatever block of training, 6 weeks, sorry, and you're going out to your first game, and like, even working with teams, and the manager's like, oh, they're ready for this game. Oh, they are, yeah, they're definitely ready. And the back here, you're like, oh, I hope they are. Do you have some kind of key things there, like, okay, in a combination of this general area in some form of conditioning test, this number of exposures at whatever pace, plus this amount of contacts or this amount of time spent contacting over the previous few weeks? Are you working off stuff like that? Is it that exact? And are you still just a little bit, yeah, I really hope they're ready?
Look, you're always going to be that nervousness about things as well, like, you know, because we're humans, no one knows what's happening, and, you know, it's such an unpredictable game at times that obviously you want to mitigate as much as you can the soft tissue or the non-contact injuries, but unfortunately with the nature of the game there is going to be them contact injuries, and it's probably minimising the damage that comes out of those. But back to your question, I guess, about, you know, standards we'd have. So we would have for positions, you know, a given 13-15 score where we'd see our guys at, and we probably categorise our guys into three levels, you can call them, you know, flying, so boys that are fit enough. And that's one thing as well, like, there is certain players that are fit enough and don't actually need to get fitter, because with a higher base it's going to be harder to get and it's going to be riskier to get an improvement on a lot of things like that, and it could be time spent better elsewhere, you know. So if you've got we've a few whippets of scrum halves, you know, what conditioning is going to be good for them? Like, why not work on, you know, a box kick if that's where their need is, or it's time, you know, sprint recovering better, you know, or, you know, their nutrition, they could be better prepared in other areas. So they'd be that flying group, and then you've got your fit group with a question mark. They kind of sit in the middle, and then you've got your, what we would deem as failing, I guess, would be them guys, and that's where I guess stuff like the off-field conditioning, or it's not always are we calling them fat? Are we allowed to say that?
Yep. Well, you call them whatever you want, we're not going to judge.
It's not always the fat guys that are unfit, and it's not always the fit guys that are, or whatever the other variation that is. You know, you can be fat and fit, and you can be unfit and fat, and there's 4 quadrants really there.
There's fit for purpose, like.
Yeah, exactly. You know, better absorption qualities, I think, is what you're getting at there, John, is it?
Yeah, well, like, beside your average general person, or probably is, like, people say, oh, he's a bit fat, isn't he? But realistically, for the role he plays, he's probably actually aerobically possibly fitter than me because of the level of training they do. He's definitely stronger, and he's 100% way better at scrummaging and lifting in a line out. So, you know, that is fit for the purpose of his role on the field, like.
And look, obviously you'd want to have mass that can produce something rather than just staying there. That's the long-term goal, but yeah, as you said, like, we have standards for positions, and there is obviously expectations, and people will deviate, and there'll be outliers either direction on those. So yeah, that failing group, then you can either supplement them with extra conditioning if needs be, and that can be in the form of on or off feet, depending on what they do. But also you got to remember that, look back historically, we've had guys that have, you know, hit like a 22 in a 30-15, and then they've come back after 6 weeks of training and they've hit like a 20.5, and you're like, you know, a 0.5 is a big difference. And then you have a chat and you realise that he got off a plane about 7 hours earlier from America. Like, so you can take it with a pinch of salt as well, like a test. The result you're getting mightn't be a true reflection of where they're at. So I think this is where it helps to know your players as well.
Yeah, and just that, like, doing well in a fitness test doesn't automatically lead to a good performance on the pitch. There are, you know, other variables tie in.
Oh, 100%. And like, you're gonna probably touch on GPS at some stage, but when guys look for numbers, like, my first question back to them is, you know, how effective were you? You know, it's not about your HMLD score there. Like, you know, what was your pass accuracy like? You know, tackles completed, gain line made, stuff like that. Because oftentimes it's an inverse correlation. The guys that run the least are the best performers, and vice versa. We've had players in the past that were out of position, but they cover 8K a game. And if you're someone looking in and going, Jesus, more distance is better, you're picking him every day of the week, you know? But the fact that he was out of position, he was covering his arse for 80 minutes, you know?
Yeah, especially with the older players, like, there's obviously, you can see their physical numbers decline, but like, if their output is getting better and they just know the game a little bit better, they're playing smarter, that's in a way what you want to see, rather than them just somehow physically excelling.
100%, yeah. And look, it's not a... Young guys do come in with this enthusiasm, but it's not always probably directed in the right place. They probably try to do too much, and again, it's doing your role to the best of your ability before looking outside the box, you know, because you are part of a collective, and the guy on your left hand side has to be able to trust you, and that you're going to execute on what you're due to do.
Obviously, testing has its flaws, and you mentioned 30-15 and stuff there. And you're obviously going to utilise a few tests throughout the pre-season, see did they respond to this train, what shape are they back coming in, how ready are they to train, not just to condition. But are you testing much throughout the season, or is it in some way built into various sessions that you do, like through, okay, this is a typical session we might do, want to make sure you're hitting this many meters per minute, but also have an idea as to where your heart rate is and how quickly it's coming down afterwards? Or do you do a few of the typical tests at various stages through the season?
Probably not to the extent that we would like to. So first off, we don't use heart rate. We've I think maybe 4 straps to cover 4 bikes inside, which is grand. But if you're trying to get through a squad of 44 or 45 in the first day, and trying to estimate everyone's max heart rate, because guess what, 220 minus your age doesn't work. like my old ass is still getting above 200 now. So the issue is, I guess, having the data in the first place to be able to compare off. And one of the big issues we find with our current location, this is not to say that it can't be done, because if you look at some of the work by Tanit Scott, he's an Australian there, and he talks about like submaximal monitoring of the heart rate. And I had a few chats with him, and they would do it down in Australia with, I think, a 4-minute continuous kind of at 60% of their 30-15 score, and they'd look at their heart rate response off that in, you know, a minute after, 2 minutes after, and this kind of stuff. Premise, beautiful, looks really good. I don't know if you've ever been to the west of Ireland though. The weather and the surface is so changeable. Like, it is mental. So like, there's no point us going, we're going to take data we got in the summer on the dry pitch on a sunny day and then try and interpret it on a bog at times the side pitch can turn into. So yeah, it's I guess you've got to be able to repeat the test you're doing, and right now we probably don't have the setup or the structure. We haven't maybe found a way in that regard to go after it. But in other facets, then, you know, we jump every 2 times a week, I should say, as a profiling metric. And there's some really comprehensive stuff you can get off the jump testing, and, you know, strength testing within the gym, as you said, build it in, whether it be like finish the last set with an AMRAP, or, you know, build up to a 3RM or something like that, or even the speed velocity side of things is great. That's that VBT side.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Do you use the velocity sometimes in the gym? Yeah,
like we've all 3 options there for us. Like, I guess rarely we'd ever go after 1RMs, because, you know, it's great to be able to shift. Yeah, there is a certain risk to it, but it's great to be able to shift, you know, 95, 100% of a given weight. But our sport, or a lot of times, it isn't dependent on being able to shift that maximal number. It's being able to shift a given percentage of that quite fast. So you've got to remember that side of things. And obviously, look, it's going to differ between positions. I guess the closer you are to the front of the scrum, the more force dominant you are. And then when you move out towards, your back threes, it becomes a bit more velocity dominant. But each player will have their characteristic, force or velocity dominant.
And you mentioned earlier, particularly when Damien asked, Damien is just, for anyone listening, Damien's hopped off, he had about 20% battery and he's sitting on a boat in Athlone, so we're not sure he'll hop back in or not yet. But you mentioned it's key to have that relationship with the manager or with the more technical, tactical coaches. How closely are you working with those in terms of, okay, I've noticed this game here, they're getting a good condition and hit off it. Instead of me going doing a block of 16 tempos, they could probably get as much or very similar from that game. I'll go on and ask the coach and he's like, oh no, I really want to work on this thing today. Are you communicating to them constantly around, could you change this a little bit? Or sometimes you have to step back a little bit. This is really specific to the style of gameplay he wants to do, and I just have to not be involved in this, let them push what they need to push, and then see can we supplement that, preferably sometimes through a modification of a game, but sometimes it might need to be something more, just as we call it, dry conditioning.
Yeah, look, I guess it's going to be slightly different this year, where we're obviously going with that rugby ball in hand from the offset, and we've a new shape to our coaching staff as well. There's been some departures and some new additions, so with that comes new philosophies and new tactics and new drills, new implementation of trainings. So it's working with them, I guess. You're there probably to supplement more than to lead, and then I guess the additional work you can do is through that feedback within session, whether it be okay, we haven't hit what we wanted in the 8 minutes of this block, roll it out to 10. We have free rein there, or it might be a manipulation of a transition within an attack and defense block that okay, we need to get a few extra meters per minute here. Let's put a ball down the far side of the pitch, and your next play is going to start from there. So coaches are mic'd up to the coaching staff, and you can feedback within or between drills, and I guess your traditional preseason will be where it's predominantly S&C led to coach supplemented to probably a 50-50, and then coach led and S&C supplemented. So we're probably trying to buck that trend a little bit by having our guys coming back within good shape. So as I said, they will have 10 runs done with that kind of aerobic premises at the forefront, and we have obviously included things that we can, aggressive changes direction towards the back end of them 10 runs. So when they come back, minus the reaction component, but they're actually able to do the high degree or high level of turns, accelerations, decels within them small set of games that it brings. Obviously there's going to be the reaction component that's missing, and that will be layered in, I guess, as we go through the first couple of weeks.
That reaction component is huge. It's something like, no matter how much you try and implement some form of turn and change direction, accelerating, decelerating, it's the speed you have to do it with, and the potential that, if I know I have to run 10 metres, turn and come back, I will predominantly have my body set up in the right position to turn. If I have my body ready to turn left and the fella in front of me turns right, I'm like, I have to turn everything in a completely different direction from a different starting point. I don't think a lot of people fully appreciate the load that places on the body and the effort that places on numerous joints and muscles throughout to cope with that. And then if you put that in 10, 15, 20 times in a 10 or 15 minute block, the fatigue from that and the preparation to condition of that is far more than I think people would have realised up to now or up to a few years ago.
Oh, 100%. And you were saying 10 or 15 times in a 10 minute block, man. That can be 3 minute blocks with some of the small set of games that people play. It can be outrageous, some of the amount of access decels that the guys are after. And it's not that they'll register on a GPS. If you're looking at ones that are greater than 3 meters per second, you might only get 2 or 3 of them, but it's possibly some of them smaller ones. As you said, if someone steps you and you have to shift side to side, it mightn't register on your back, but it is a loading that has to be appreciated.
It's also an important point to consider in terms of both, us looking at it from an S&C lens. You also want players to be really good at that for the actual playing of the sport. So preparing them for stuff like that, whether it be with a ball in hand and you're trying to sidestep someone, or you're preparing for someone coming at you with a ball in hand. I would say ability to manipulate your body to react to that is probably reasonably highly correlated with success in games, or certainly with successful tackles made, which is, you know, that's where we're eventually going.
Yeah, like you got to build towards that. I guess what we're doing is we're trying to get a few steps ahead of the curve by the time we land back. That, you know, rather than hitting that evasion style drill within week 4 or 5, you know, that we're able to bring it in some shape or form week 2, week 3, and go from there. So then your players have got 2 extra weeks of that higher intensity kind of style training.
I know Shane was saying, we were chatting a couple of weeks ago, Shane was working with a rugby team, and saying, just without giving away any secrets, the intensity they play an awful lot of their in games at, he's like, you know, they're getting an awful lot of a physical hit from this. I'm just going to probably supplement that with a few more tempo runs and stuff, because if we can get a lot of the conditioning from the game, well, in a way it does our job for us, but it's also far more specific to the sport they're playing. Shane, you can probably hop in and explain that better than me.
Yeah, it's kind of, in many ways, it's the ideal scenario, because the rugby coach is happy because they're getting to play as much rugby as he wants, and you're happy because they're hitting their main metrics that you're looking at, and then you're just kind of filling in the gaps as well. So it's just, in many cases, it's just sitting back and watching and paying attention to the sessions. You can see what they are doing and making sure that it's not just the 4 lads that happen to be kind of wearing the heart monitors that day that are doing these things, and there's a few lads just sitting around the outskirts not doing it. But would you kind of monitor, liaise with the coaching staff to see what they're doing, know the games, and then say, okay, well, I have a rough idea that this is going to give them all this output. This is then what I have to do off the back of that.
Yeah, like we have done our drill databases in the past. They won't be trying out the window completely, obviously, with this the coaching staff coming through. You know, it's probably more so a feedback that historically we've done this, or we've increased a rule or introduced a rule here where, you know, if you do get touched, or if you touch, you know, it's out to the sideline, yada yada, or dimensions, whatever. Like, there's so many variables we can change. And it's probably more so the education from us that we've done this in the past. It's changed this metric, if we're looking at, say, whatever you want. That sometimes we could have our front 5 or all forwards playing a game in a certain dimensions, so a lot smaller sided, and then if we want our backs then playing a more, you know, open style game on the other half of the pitch, that you know, we're getting a bit more of that soft tissue loading from the posterior perspective, I guess. So it's probably, I guess, it's more so the fact that I've probably been in this long enough that I've a tendency towards things, or I've probably failed enough times to have some insights. And like, it's never going to be 100% science. It's probably half science, half art, really. And I guess I've had the luxury of, you know, trialing things out and seeing what's happened, good and bad, and going from there. So yeah, I kind of empathise in a way with other coaches out there, and it's easy, I guess, from my end. You know, I've a GPS there as well to guide me as well, or certain guys that have heart rate monitors. You know, it's very good. Like, I know Steve Casey, he's absolutely phenomenal with some of the stuff he puts out with the heart rate, especially that lower intensity loading that kind of gets neglected. As you said, you know, it could be in the form of a tempo run, and you're probably getting 2 bites of the cherry there as well with some of the preventative stuff as well.
And then with preventative stuff, for when you're doing return to play, is there ever any time where you try and include ball work? So say, for example, I don't know, if he's going to be cut out, he's out at a bad time of the season, maybe it's kind of 3-4 weeks of rehab, and the coach is very keen to not have him lose any skill or not have him lose that first step as such. Do you try and incorporate that into it, or is your sole focus with return to play going to be, no, I need him conditioned first, then we can add balls in, so you have to do A before you can move on to B sort of approach?
I think A and B can live together, to be honest. It's just how you shape a drill. You know, just because Dan Baker or Martin Bichette said, you know, you've got to do 3x8 at 85% intensity or higher, you know, to get a given adaptation, doesn't mean that you can't, you know, add a turn, add a down up, add a bag hit. You know, there's such an energy cost from them. And if you're just looking at a number on GPS, you know, you're not going to see them unless you go, obviously, accelerometer side of things, but that's another story itself. But you got to appreciate the cost of other things. And I guess after a while you build up a bit of an appreciation of how much each of those takes from a total perspective. So if I do start a drill off with a bag hit, that, okay, I'm going to decrease the running distance by, let's say, 10%. I'm pulling that out of the air, but you can gauge better after a while And as I said, like we go to things like surface there, it can change quite a lot during the year with us. If it's a heavy ground, you know, okay, I'm not going to run this guy, you know, excessive long distance or loads of turns, or, you know, you do get appreciation to the elements, I guess, around that. And then even chats with the player himself, you know, right, he's had a bad sleep last night, you know, newborn. And I guess that's more along the monitoring side of things as well, obviously. But yeah, I don't think you should be stuck to a given program or schedule. You know, there's always wiggle room around it. And I think definitely introduce the ball early, try and bring it back to the sport as quick as you can, because you've got an opportunity to nearly overindulge them in skill development in that regard. So they should come back a better player. It's the hard and fast. And I know a lot of return to play protocols are, you know, 90% of the uninjured limb would be a criteria, but you know, that doesn't mean that it should be 90% skill coming back either. It should be, you know, why not more? So things I do within sessions, I could have guys juggling in between reps. I've done maths on the fly with them. My nerdy background, I've had a board where they'll come out to do a turn and there'll be a
quadratic equation on the floor there.
and now in multiplication, sometimes you got to dial them down to like very simple plus with some of the guys because there's a wide range of IQs inside. But like it's just about, you know, grand running brings its own cost, but there's other costs you can do, like the mental cost of certain things. And if you chat to a guy afterwards, a lot of them will just shut off during the conditioning. They just turn off upstairs. So I've done things where like they've got to remember a string of numbers so we can get out to 10 numbers and shit like that by the time they've done 10 reps, and they'll feed that back, and just random things like that. And look, maybe it's more so for my own sanity as well, being out there, you know, 5 days a week running guys. But I definitely think if you can bring it back to the game as quick as possible, do it.
That's a great point about your own sanity. Sometimes when I'm like doing a block or run, I find it very hard because, you know, you're a bit of a hype man there, but at the same time you're like, oh, how fully engaged am I in this one? We just have to get through the runs. But for something like that, I think it's a brilliant idea. You know, again, as much for your own engagement as it is for the players, but keeping them switched on cognitively, because again, it's still one of the end points we're looking at.
Yeah, like, and look, if we're doing handling drills, you know, I'm doing it too. So I'm getting something there, or, you know, I'm keeping myself occupied in a way as well. Like, and even out of boredom, I'll hop in with a few runs as well. Like, and I probably got in the depths of winter last year where the hammies were hanging off me from doing 3 or 4 runs a day. That I said, okay, maybe I'll periodise my own running here. But yeah, look, it can be a very rewarding part of the job as well. Like, as you said, John, you know, you just gotta look after your own sanity at times as well.
Just to pull it back a bit to the monitoring there, and you find it, you know, obviously very useful to have GPS, but what are you actually looking at? Because I know so many players or teams who get the GPS first. I think it's a fallacy in GA that, okay, we look at total distance, and we see this lad covered 7, this lad covered 8, this lad covered 9, this lad covered 10, must have played well. Total distance is probably not that relevant or useful, but what is relevant, and it'll obviously differ between sports, but in rugby, what are you looking at, whether it be live or after a game or at the end of a total week?
So we wouldn't look at total distance, we look at probably running distance, so we exclude anything that's walking based, and we'll have that as almost a loading. It's not a performance metric. To be honest, none of our GPS metrics are performance metrics. What I'll always direct the guy back is go to analysis, you know, ask them, what were your numbers like, rather than, you know, checking, grand, you ran the most distance there from a HMLD perspective, but if the 42 were doing the player ratings, you were only getting a 4, you know, that kind of. So I'd say the main ones we track are HMLD, because, you know, it's a composite metric, and we can probably use it to an extent squad wide, because it obviously includes, you know, your accelerations, decelerations, and your higher speed running.
What's HMLD there?
Sorry, high metabolic load distance. So if you go back to the papers, it's, and I'm pulling a figure out here, I think it's like 25.5 watts per kg. It's an action above, beyond that you get rewarded for, basically. So what they've come back with is it equates to a hard acceleration, a hard deceleration, and then any distance you cover over 5.5 meters per second. So we've fed that back to players, and we've tried to contextualize them. So if you think of a launch call, an aggressive bit of line speed from a defensive standpoint, we'll say to the players, you get rewarded from a HMLD perspective with that action. Or if we've like a kick chase or something, like a run like fuck, as we would have called it inside. Very colourful. That's how we try and apply that. You get rewarded by doing an action. We fed this back other ways. You can do it like a total meters, or you can do it as an occurrence, so a HML effort. So when you do one of those, you get rewarded. Boys tend to like that. They like to compete on something, but mostly what they like to compete on, and I think you can guess what it is max speed. The boys just fucking love that. I don't know for what reason, whether it's vanity or what, or a style of vanity. And then I guess from our background, and we're tracking things from a monitoring standpoint. Your high speed runner, for us in particular, being the number of sprint exposures, and I guess this is the kind of Goldilocks, not too much, not too little, from the preventative standpoint. I think it's pretty common knowledge now, but probably some of Shane Malone's work.
And in terms of like max speed exposures, are you looking across the total week? This is kind of the general window we want to fall into. If it all comes from a game, great. If you only get 2/3 of that in a game, we have to supplement that in training in some way.
So we'd have in-house totals. What we do is a 7-day rolling basically, because our week is never going to be Monday to Sunday. We can have a Friday night game, we can have a Sunday afternoon game, and even this year, I've branched out to a Monday. So what we do is an actual 7-day rolling. So it looks from today back 7 days, tomorrow back 7 days from then, and so on. And we would have our totals there from most of the metrics where we'd like to live. Predominantly the big ones we're looking at is probably that HMLD and sprint exposures. And then we have opportunities within the week to hit some of the sprint exposures. So probably the best time we can hit a guy with a sprint exposure is a sub that's played maybe 10 minutes, and it's probably going to be the freshest he will be, or the furthest away from the next game. So that's an opportunity there. Or then we have opportunities on a Tuesday or Wednesday based on the shape of the week, where we can hit them, pre or post training. And sometimes it'll be pre-training, if guys have a good scatter of sprints in the tank, you're not afraid of what's coming up in session. That grand, they can do a sprint here and they can do 3 or 4 within session. They're still going to be good. And then you maybe have guys that, they may or may not hit them session. So you go, right, we'll hit them afterwards then. And you can talk about, they're going to be fatigued afterwards and they're not going to get their maximal speed. But if we're getting guys above that 90% mark, we've kind of ticked off the preventative side of things, knowing that it's not going to obviously lead to speed development, but it's minimising injury.
Just out of interest, actually, when it comes to like hitting max speed, does that happen more in training or in matches? Like if you're doing something specific to speed, or it's obviously going to be some bits position specific. Like,
so backs hit it in matches more often, forwards hit it in training more often. Now that's your run of the mill training. Obviously, when we set out a 50-60 meter race at training for 2 backs, you might hit it there. But from times gone by, forwards get it in training, because obviously they're probably super maximal in that regard, whereas backs. And look, again, it's dependent on the coach whether he blows up the whistle if someone makes a break. Do you let that play continue?
Yeah.
If you do, fantastic. Your back has got his speed exposure from that. But oftentimes, and what had happened historically was a guy would make a break and then right next ruck. So I guess that was probably a good learning from us, that we need to let the play develop just a bit more. Grant, the ball was turned over, but how was our defensive reaction to that? Or did that back get that speed exposure that he could have gotten?
Just you briefly mentioned there, subs, like a fellow who plays maybe 10 minutes, it's a good time to hit him with some speed work afterwards. How do you like manage that overall for subs? It's something I'm assuming at the professional level it's not an issue, but at amateur level, the condition for subs after a game, I tend not to do it, largely, to be honest. I try and warm up a little bit harder than is needed in game to try and get some little hit there, particularly if there's 20 minutes to go and there's super subs on. I'm looking at the rest, I'm like, yeah, lads, your chances of coming on are slim enough, so we're going to get something here now. But I'm like, oh no, you're going to be so fired up now when you come on there. If I ever listen, sorry lads. But after a game, to actually condition players as you go down through the levels, I'm like, I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze here because of the negative psychological elements. Like obviously I see the physical reasons for it. I assume you don't really have to factor that in too much at the professional level.
So look, it's, I guess, what's perfect world scenario and what's real world scenario. So in times where we weren't able to charter flights, and we had a flight out of Bristol Airport at 10:30, had you time to run a guy afterwards, maybe not. So this is where, the real world comes in. Or had two players in that given position gone down during the game, and you're kind of looking at this guy and going, do I really need to run him here? Am I risking something when, we're going to be a bit light in that next week and he's definitely going to be playing? I'm not saying you should back away from ever conditioning a guy and you shouldn't condition out of fear, but it's probably going, right, you know what, he played 25. It was actually a pretty high tempo game. We've got a short turnaround. It's the 6th day. It's probably not worth it. So it's going to be very context dependent. I guess a rule of thumb we'd use, or we'd look at guys, is that kind of 25-30 minute mark. And if guys haven't played that much, we'll have a chat in the dressing room. And guys are very good for this. I'll literally say, do you want to hit it now? Or we have an opportunity maybe to go after it Monday as well, or maybe we go off feed as well after. If it's a prop that, he might have had 7 scrums when he came on, but obviously didn't run that much. Maybe it's better off, stick him on a bike. It's just, I guess it's context dependent. It's chat to the athlete, and then go from there.
Actually, just something popped into me on something you said a minute ago there. That 7-day roll on average that you're looking at in terms of the HMLD and everything that way, do you look at that, keep that reasonably constant, or is there an element of block loading every 3 to 4 weeks? You're slowly raising and drop, or do you just have too many exposures to games to risk loading and going in fatigued?
So you're going to have certain stretch weeks, I guess, but a lot of what we do, or a lot of periodization, is probably done off the turnaround. So whether it be
a 10-day versus a 6-day.
Yeah, exactly. And then you got to factor in things like travel and shit like that. So if we've played over in Italy on a Sunday, come back maybe that night, maybe the Monday morning, and we have a Friday game at the sports ground, or even a Friday game, worst case scenario, away again the week after, it's going to be a low week straight off the bat. you can't reach in that week. But that's not to say that the guys that get left behind on both of them trips can't push the boat out a bit more. And I guess that's where you look at the team as a whole. Grand, you can have your 25 guys that travel, and they're going to have a given loading. But if we have the opportunity to top up them remaining 20 guys, if they're all well and fit, let's get them in an academy session on a Friday while the guys are travelling over. And let's, times gone by, we would have given them guys some AIL exposure, but obviously last year that was not an option. So yeah, look, you can push with certain parts of the team in certain times, and other times you got to be respectful. Obviously, if you've got a back rower that's played 8 games in a row, it's managing. You're not going to get much adaptation out of them there. You've got to keep them fresh, because we can get out to 13-14 games in a row, week on, week off, or week after week, and with that brings its own problems. And if you get light in an area, then as well, it does become a bit interesting.
And then, so for example, if you were, say, for the coaches there who wouldn't have the luxury of having GPS data, if you were at rugby training, obviously with the exception of weeks when you might have 2 matches or a midweek match, would you try to include sprint exposure at least once a week, or would it be factored off perceived exertion scale, or how would you kind of factor that in if you didn't have the GPS to build your plan around, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's probably, I guess, observing what happened in the match, and it's going to be a bit of a coach's eye here. You can probably get a feel for the tempo of the game, what it was like, and then when we're talking about our sprints, probably just keep an eye on the back triers and how many times did they make that break, how many kick chases was there, stuff like that. It's a pretty crude metric here, but also talk to the player. How many times did you open up out there today? Maybe once, twice, grand. Take it off. With the short turnarounds, if it's going to be a week where you miss the sprint exposures, but as we said, like obviously post game as well on that first Saturday, that could be an opportunity right there, even if it is a short turnaround. And look, it's probably not going to be detrimental if you miss 1 week. Try not to back weeks. I guess one of the issues we had in my intern year was we noticed that after it happened, a guy hadn't sprinted for eight weeks. When you look back through the data, and it was a blindside by us as a department, and it's definitely been a learning from mine since. And a lot of it was coming from what I said, the coach blowing up the whistle. So letting that play develop. But yeah, just link in with players, and even from the conditioning standpoint, John, as well. Like, ask a player, do you need this? Do you want it?
You mentioned earlier about the speaking to the analysts. Do the analysts ever look to integrate some of the GPS data and what they collect?
Yeah, so we've had various stabs in the past, and we probably never nailed it really. It is a work in progress for us, and we're getting closer to there. And it probably is where, I guess, this industry is going as well. You know, the insights that you can gain, that the average speed going into a tackle is going to be this. So then you can start to work backwards and say, okay, a guy's experiencing X amount of momentum going into that. Versus obviously where the high speed exposure is happening in a game, and pairing them up then with an action. So we have done iterations of it. Is it perfect? No. Can it get better? Yeah. Are we trying to develop it? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's something I looked at a few years ago myself. I was trying to develop some form of player efficiency score, player efficiency rating, and just, XY axis on one axis. I had the game actions that the stats lads collected. I was, they sent me on an XML file. I was able to parse that down. On the other side, I had total distance, but also had meters per minute to see, and if I drew an A-B line, were some lads falling above or below the line. So to see, like, are some lads covering huge distances, and we have 6 actions, and other lads like not covering huge distance but have 10, 12, 14 actions. Just see an overall, it wasn't something that ever really planned to show players. It was more for management, like, just saying well done to the lad who covered 10.5k probably isn't that relevant, because look at all of the other actions, because they were looking at them in isolation. It's obviously something that would have to be very specific to that team and the specific stats that they keep and the specific game actions they keep, but that was always something I should have looked to develop a bit more maybe.
But you've touched on it there as well. Like, you've got to understand the metrics that are going to work with your population and your team, and that integrate with your philosophy of how you play. Because if we want to be, if we want to be a high tempo team, is collision load the best thing to look at, or is it more, as you said, meters per minute maybe as a pace metric, or do we go into the analyst side of things and look at the ball and play time and try and drive that side of things? So it depends what type of team you are. You play to your strengths, obviously, try and mitigate your weaknesses, but also complement it in what you're feeding back to the guys. And what I would say is, with anything you feed back to the guys, make sure that it's actionable on their part, that if they can do something to affect it, that it will show. It's not just a byproduct of the game.
Do you find there's much, I suppose, shithousery, for lack of a better word, with lads when they're messing around with the GPS? Because I was only listening to a football podcast the other day, and they were just saying stories about how lads would kind of, if the coach blew it up for a break, they'd sprint in to get their water, just because they know, right, the sports science coach is going to be watching this, and if I don't have a high output, I know I've done absolutely nothing today. If I don't have at least one, he's going to be on me, and he's going to make me do my sprints and my conditioning.
Yeah, so this is where I guess we talk about how clean the data is coming in. So if you are creating a drill database, you've got to ensure that it's only including actual pitch time, as you said. So once that whistle goes, the drill is cut, that anyone that was doing conditioning on the side, that they're dropped, because obviously they're going to inflate numbers. You're going to have player X over there doing, I don't know, shuttles to beat the band for them 3 minutes, because he's not going to get a run out in this session. And then you look and you go, geez, he went great. But you look back historically as well, and you can't piece together that he was actually just doing. So if you are collecting data in that regard, it's got to be clean. But yeah, you hear some of the top speeds hit by guys are, right back defenders going up to celebrate a goal in a Premier League game. So again, with GPS, for me, it always comes back to the context. And I think you've probably touched on it there, Shane, all right?
Is there anything you can't currently monitor that you wish you were able to?
Probably the heart rate side of things, and that's just literally, we don't have it, and that's probably greedy from my aspect. It's something I'd like to look into, because I think you can look at an input versus an output. So you can, when conditioning a guy, you can give him an input and see what output comes, or vice versa. You can give them an output and see what the input is. So the internal versus the external. So for me, heart rate would be definitely one that I'd like to get after a bit more. Probably accelerometer stuff as well is we probably don't utilize it enough, and this is just the reality of it. Our jerseys aren't tight enough to give us a correct reading on them. The unit literally bounces around too much.
We don't actually have that problem in South Dublin, would you believe? Everyone's jerseys are bet on.
Yeah, we need to go a few sizes smaller or something, but like we have like collisions. We've probably the highest collision load within the RFU of the 4 provinces, and it's not because of the way we play. It's literally because the unit does bounce that much extra. So it goes back to like collecting clean data. There's no point us going after accelerometer stuff when we don't have the setup in place. We could probably look at trends and like kind of normalize stuff, but if you're looking to be actionable off it, it's not really there as of now.
In terms of it's something we've chatted about a little bit before. Do many of the players use wearables and then try and feed some of that back to you, and you're there in one way? Like, I'm not sure how reliable this is, but on the same time, that's actually really interesting. I hadn't thought of that having that impact on him.
Yeah, so I think the whole wearables thing it's going to be huge. It's getting bigger. It's probably going to even move to implantables within the next 10, 20 years. You know, where we're probably looking at, you know, core temperature and fucking lactate readings on the fly, and that realistically is where it's going. Obviously, it's ethical issues and all that kind of crack. But we would have a few guys that wear, you know, whoops. I think 1 or 2 of the Aura ring. Do I trust everything that comes back on it? Yes and no. You know, it's probably an algorithm based product that it's ever evolving, ever learning, and again, it's going to look at all the data it collects, and it's going to probably try and identify trends. But what it's great for, it's starting conversations, you know, and what it can do as well, it can keep guys honest. So if you have this, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but this recovery score that the guys get, they know that if they get their 8-9 hours of sleep, that it's probably going to give them a good recovery score. Fantastic. They've done something good, beneficial to the recovery process. Whether it's reflective of what they've done, I honestly don't care. But, you know, they've actually gone and looked after themselves. And if it keeps them accountable to that, fucking amen. Jouet, like, the only thing I would say, and it's probably fed back to me from one of the players, that before one of the games he woke up the morning, felt great, then went onto the app and his recovery score was shit, and it played in his mind throughout the day, didn't have a great game. So with our guys there, some of them are extremely like hypersensitive and like very in tune with their body. Others now just, you know, rock up and love the carnage on a Saturday night. But if you've got someone that's that impressionable, I guess is probably the right word here, that if they see a score and they go, oh shit, I feel bad, but I feel good. So it's that conflict. It's like when the COVID symptoms came out initially, like you read them and you feel them. You know, Jesus, I do have a tickle in my throat. So it's if you put something in front of a player, they can associate to it, or they oftentimes will associate with it, whether it's right or wrong.
See, because I'm a bit of a nerd. I follow the Tour de France fairly closely, and some of the teams released a few of them released their like speed and their watts and stuff, but some released their whoop band data. And it's so interesting to see like after a good bit after the fact. Last year when Pogacar won, they said like his ability to, like, you know, climb up hills, unreal, do time trials, unreal, but his ability to recover day on day for 3 weeks was just through the charts. And for stuff like that, and like that's ultimately what it's for, particularly when you have those short turnarounds, being able to recover well between those, and then when it's encouraging players that, you know, sleep really helps you recover, then in turn gets them to have good sleeps with good sleep hygiene. It's obviously in general going to be a big positive.
Cool. I was going to say, even if they're not 100% accurate, the idea behind them is they're promoting healthy practices. They're promoting eating properly, going to bed, getting your 8 to 9 hours, and drinking enough water. And so, like, it's things that we're blue in the teeth from telling players, but for some reason when a watch tells them to do it, it's gospel. But it is making them do it, like, and that's the grand thing. Like, you're never going to get a wearable that costs you whatever £100 that's as accurate as a laboratory, but at least it's getting good practices across. Something we wanted to touch on, just because it has become over the past years far more topical in rugby, is around concussion. And just from an S&C point of view, is because obviously they're making rule changes, they're being quite strict on it. I know Ross Tucker does huge work for whatever the international body that governs rugby is called. But from S&C end, what can we do to
possibly reduce the risk of concussions happening, whether it be through neck, shoulder specific work or anything around there, or are there other areas you may potentially look at?
So yeah, we can talk about technical side of it versus our responsibility from an S&C perspective as well. But the big one is that it's actually the tackler that's in the most how do you word it? That is the biggest risk of getting a concussion rather than the person being tackled. If we look at what the research says, neck strength training or neck strengthening, it's a bit inconclusive. It makes sense in my head anyways, but it's not actually shown up in all the research out there. Some say yes, some say no. What seems to be the biggest one is actually the ability to anticipate the hit. So with this, there's probably three big rocks there. Reaction time to the stimulus in front of you. So if someone does a sidestep on it, that you can readjust your body position, or if there's an incoming hit, that you can put yourself in a more favourable position. The second will be the vision training, which kind of ties in as well with this. And there's stuff we've done with certain guys inside. There's I don't know if you've ever come across the Brook string, or Brock string, I should say, even Brock. But it's literally, it can help work on peripheral and stuff like that. And this is probably more for the person being tackled, that you're able to identify the thread out the right hand side of your eye, and then being able to brace for impact. So that's where the neck strengthening issue or aspect comes in. So if you have all the strength in the world in your neck, fantastic. But if you're not anticipating the hit, you're probably not going to put it to much use. Your head's already had that whiplash effect before you can actually, create that tension in the neck to brace for impact. So we do things with inside from a neck strengthening perspective. You've got isometric holds, and you accompany that with like shrugs or raises. We've got the devices like the iron neck is one that's going around now. It's pretty good. You can do Swiss ball work, holds, movements on them, or even something as simple as a bear crawl, where you're applying some manual resistance, whether it be through the hand or with a band, as they work through that. So trying to connect up a movement with an isometric hold in the neck. But yeah, there is that big emphasis on tackling and where you're putting your head when you do tackle. And I guess the flip side of that is it does fall back on us. If a player is fatigued, that can impair their ability to put their head in the right position. So it's not us outsourcing the blame to coaches or anything. Like we do have a part to play in this as well.
Which makes it interesting then around that some of the recommendations, I'm not going to go down like fully this rabbit hole, I just think it's worth mentioning that outlawing tackling at a younger age, I think is going to weaken the skills of players to perceive where a hip is going, where a player is going, and how to put themselves in the right position to make that tackle, when they're probably at an age where the damage is so unlikely due to like less force, less size, less strength, everything that way. Because it's not the same argument as heading in soccer. Heading in soccer, no matter what age, it's a lot of force going down your head, whether you're like 8 years old, 18-year-olds or 28 years old. Whereas in rugby, I don't think it's the same argument at all.
No, that's fair. Like, and just the demands of the game are just getting a bit more aggressive, a bit harder. It's some of the specimens out there and some of the hits that go in. Like, as you said, if you weigh up both sides of the coin there, is it better exposing children at a younger age to reacting to them situations and being able to anticipate hits and putting their head in the right position, rather than outlawing it till 13, 14, and then this new novel skill comes in, and you've got maybe that big 15-year-old that's playing. So yeah, it's a fair point.
Something just briefly I wanted to touch on, I mentioned to you beforehand as we start to wrap up, you coming from the PE background, doing your degree, and as I mentioned, it wasn't heavy on science, but it was very heavy on group and organisation, speaking to people, managing groups, your 1990 principle and all stuff like that. Because you then went deeper down the sports science, the S&C, the physiology route, a bit unbeknownst to yourself, did you have an awful lot of those more people coaching skills that you were just layering specific sports science knowledge on top of? Do you think that was very useful? Because I hear a lot of coaches say they're the best in the world when it comes to in-depth knowledge, but they then have to build the coaching skills on top of it, and they may have found it difficult. Going the opposite direction, do you think maybe that has been a help to you in professional coaching?
Yeah, and it's probably something I never appreciated when I was doing it, But like the exposure we got within college, you know, we did 16 weeks structured, but we also had modules where we worked with children from kind of, you know, lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and even I worked with children with disabilities, did swim lessons with them for 3 to 4 years of college as well. And it just, to be honest, like S&C coaches knowledge base, and there's so much out there as well, and like so many variations, so many ways to, you know, skin the cat, as the overused phrase is, that a lot of it comes down to how you implement it, and how you implement it is based off communication. So whether it be build rapport, or, you know, creating a scenario where the athlete feels what you're trying to get them to do. For me, it was huge. Like, so if there's any young coaches out there, what I'd say is, you know, work with diverse populations, work with people with, you know, disabilities, or the elderly, or, you know, at a cool camp. If it's still, I don't know, they're still called cool camps, John, are they?
They are, yeah. They're a rival of my camp, so we don't promote them here.
Or John's camp. But yeah, just throw yourself in every direction. You know, I'm very fortunate, I guess, with my work background, that even before like maths and PE in UL, like I worked in a warehouse, I worked in a restaurant, I worked as a janitor, I rented bikes, and like with each
in San Francisco.
Yeah. So with each one of those, like there's life experience and lessons. Like I remember I was so the janitor work was down in Manhattan in New York, and I was the only Caucasian guy there, and I was called Barry Whiteboy. That was me for the summer, like. So like, but it was a new environment. Hey, Barry Whiteboy. So like it was brilliant exposure for me, because it was a new environment. It was a new set of people, new interests, and I think I've been able to take all that. And when you have a squad of 45 odd, you know, you've some guys that love Games of Thrones, and some guys that still collect Pokemon cards and stuff like that, and it's being able to build that rapport with them based off, you know, the subtlest thing that I might have an interest. And I guess, like, no more than my sporting background, a jack of all trades, I've pretty varied interest, or at least I can dive into a lot of different barrels if needs be. So yeah, I would say for me, communication is probably underrated, and something I definitely didn't appreciate enough when I started off.
That's an excellent point. Shane, do you want to have, you know, any final bits?
No, I was going to say that's a common enough thread. The different coaches we talk to, like a lot of people would ask, what's something not coaching related that you'd recommend other coaches to do, or like a job they should do before they get into it. And it's always around that communication side of things, where you can just, like, you underestimate how much you can get from just knowing a little bit about a lot of different things, even just for opening that door to a player who may have just given you an RPE score of whatever, just 5 every single time, because you never talk to them, they just fill it out without thinking, and then you ask them one question, you talk to them a bit about just their normal life, then they'll fill it out, or then they'll trust you, and they'll kind of give you so much more.
And yeah, I think you hit on it there. Trust is the big part here, and I think it's trust from the player in what you're doing with them, and then trust on what they're giving back to you as well. So as we talk about, you know, data being clean, or, you know, if you want to action upon data, it needs to be good quality. So as you said, if the guy always gives you 5, you know, is it because the guy in front of him always says 5? You know, so that there's all these little factors here. But then on the far side, if that guy gives you a 6, that's a huge change for him. When you're looking at your mean or your Z scores versus the guy that, you know, depending on the weather, he might be a 4 to an 8. So yeah, there's all these little subtleties that I guess you learn as you go.
Barry, it's been absolutely fantastic today. Give us loads of really great info. You've been brilliant with your time. If anyone wants to make contact, where could they possibly hit you up, or do you want anyone making contact?
I'm not really active on any social platforms, to be honest, apart from my own personal accounts, which I'd probably steer clear of. But if you do want to reach out, or, you know, you can find me probably on LinkedIn, or barry.o'brien@connachtrugby.ie. And more than happy to chat to people. Yeah.
It's been excellent. Fair play to you.
Thanks a million, Brian.
John, thanks, Shane.